The sun hung low over the dry plains of central Texas, casting a bronze light over the dust that swirled around the auction pen. Men leaned on the worn rails with arms crossed, eyes narrowed beneath weathered cowboy hats. Inside the ring, a red-chestnut stallion bucked and pulled against thick chains, every muscle carved like it had been forged from stone. He wasn't just resisting, he was defying. His name, at least to the few who dared say it, was Blaze. But to most folks here, he was just a number, another wild thing meant to be broken. At the edge of the ring stood Boone Kincaid, a man with the posture of someone who'd carried more weight than any man should. His jeans were stained with years of work, his shirt tucked half-heartedly under a leather belt worn smooth at the buckle. Boone had lost his wife, June, 5 winters ago. Since then, people said he barely spoke, except to horses. Folks didn't understand it, but he could look an animal in the eye and see what was broken, and sometimes mend it. Blaze reared up, a violent wave of power and fury, his front hooves slicing the air. The chain handlers stepped back, muttering curses. From the other side of the pen, Cyrus Bellamy spit in the dirt and shook his head. "Should have put this one down on the trail," he growled, loud enough for Boone to hear. Cash, his son, watched in silence, unsure whether to nod or speak. His hands gripped the fence tighter, jaw clenched. Boone stepped forward, slow and deliberate. The crowd tensed. One of the wranglers made a move to lift his whip, but Boone raised a hand. Not to Blaze, but to the man. "You raise that thing again, I'll make sure you never use it twice," he said without raising his voice. The whip was lowered. Even Sheriff Holt Bexley, standing nearby, didn't say a word. He just watched. Blaze's breathing slowed. His hooves shifted nervously in the dirt. Boone reached out, fingers open, palm up. No rope, no chain, no force, just an offer. The stallion flared his nostrils, eyes blazing with defiance, but he didn't bolt. For a single moment, it was as if the chaos cracked, and something ancient and wounded looked back through the animal's gaze. And then the old iron gate creaked. Blaze reared again, not from rage, but fear. Dust exploded. Chains rattled. Men scrambled. A whip hit the ground. And through it all, Boone Kincaid didn't move an inch. The dust had barely settled, but the silence that followed was deafening. Blaze stood at the far end of the pen, flanks heaving, eyes locked on Boone Kincaid like a man watching a ghost from his past. The chains hung loose now, and Boone could feel the tremor in the earth every time the horse shifted his weight. Around them, the crowd whispered, uncertain whether they had just witnessed a standoff or the start of something else. Cyrus Bellamy stepped down from the viewing platform with a scowl carved deep into his face. "This ain't no trick, Boone," he barked. "That horse is dangerous. Ain't a damn thing in him worth saving." His voice echoed across the pen, but Boone didn't flinch. He just stared at Blaze, whose ears twitched at the sound of the man's anger. Cash Bellamy, standing behind his father, didn't say a word, but he didn't look away from the horse either. From the far side of the yard, May Delmore had been watching with folded arms and cautious eyes. She'd been called out before the auction, when Blaze arrived with a bloodied flank and fire in his eyes. She'd cleaned his wounds. He hadn't let her near his face, but he hadn't tried to kick her either. "There's fear in that horse," she had told Sheriff Bexley. "But not madness." Now, watching Boone stand motionless in the dirt, she realized something else. There was grief, too. Sheriff Holt Bexley removed his hat and rubbed his brow. "If anyone else had stood in front of that beast, I'd be calling for a stretcher," he muttered to May. "But Boone, he don't move like the rest of us. Ain't like he's trying to tame the animal. It's like he's listening to it." May nodded, her gaze fixed on the man and the horse, two creatures both broken in different ways. Blaze, still restless, took one step forward, then another. Boone didn't reach out. He just breathed, deep and even. His fingers were relaxed, hanging at his sides. And for a split second, Blaze lowered his head. Not all the way, not in submission, but in recognition. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it wasn't defiance either. From the fence, Otis Langford, owner of the auction house, leaned toward Sheriff Bexley. "What the hell is that man doing?" he muttered. The sheriff didn't answer right away. Instead, Boone finally spoke. His voice was low, like wind through dead branches. "I ain't here to break you, Blaze. I'm here because I know what it's like to lose everything and not trust nobody." The trailer rattled as Boone Kincaid pulled onto the long gravel road leading to his ranch. Blaze was in the back, calm for now, but Boone could feel the tension pulsing like a second heartbeat behind him. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the Texas landscape. Boone's hands gripped the wheel, but his thoughts were with the horse, and with the woman he hadn't spoken of out loud in 5 years. June would have known what to say. She always did. Back at the auction yard, Cyrus Bellamy had stormed off after Boone signed the paperwork. "You just wasted your money on a ticking time bomb," he'd snapped. Boone hadn't replied. Cash Bellamy had stayed behind for a moment, watching Boone quietly. Something in the boy's expression wasn't defiance. It was curiosity. Boone had seen it before, the way a younger man starts to question everything he's been told. When they arrived, Boone opened the trailer door slowly. Blaze didn't bolt. He didn't rear. He stood still, watching Boone with guarded eyes. The ranch was quiet. Old barn leaning just a little more than last year, the windmill creaking like it was whispering secrets to the sky. Boone led the horse toward the corral, the same one where he'd trained dozens of Mustangs before. But this time it felt different. Like he wasn't breaking in a horse. He was meeting someone with his own kind of grief. Inside the barn, Boone lit a single lantern and hung it from a beam. He filled a bucket with water and left it near the fence. Blaze didn't drink at first. Just paced. Ears back. Muscles twitching. Boone sat on the edge of a hay bale, quiet, letting the silence do the work. He'd learned a long time ago that healing didn't come through noise. It came through stillness. Through time. His eyes drifted to the scar just above Blaze's left eye. Faint but deep. Not from barbed wire. It was too clean. Too deliberate. Boone exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding sinking in. "Someone didn't just try to tame you," he muttered. "They tried to break you for good." Blaze flicked his ear but didn't look away. Boone felt his chest tighten. That kind of scar. He knew it. Not on his skin, but somewhere deeper. In that moment, a flash of memory hit him. June's laugh echoing through this very barn, the warmth of her hand brushing his shoulder, the way she'd whisper to frightened animals like they were children. Boone closed his eyes. "Let's just start with silence, Blaze," he said. "Sometimes that's the only place trust has a chance to grow." The next morning broke cold and gray, unusual for late summer in Texas. Mist hovered over the pasture like ghosts unwilling to leave. Boone stepped out onto his porch, coffee in hand, watching Blaze through the fog. The horse stood motionless in the corral, his coat still damp from the night dew, his eyes alert. Boone hadn't slept much. Every creak of the barn boards made him sit up in bed. Not out of fear, but out of a feeling he couldn't shake. Like something was coming. Across town, at the Bellamy Ranch, Cyrus tossed a leather saddle onto a training post with a loud thud. "That damn fool Kincaid's gonna get himself killed," he barked. Cash, brushing down a young filly nearby, didn't answer. Cyrus turned sharply. "You hear me, boy? That wild stallion should have been put down. You don't fix a horse like that. You finish it." Cash paused, hand tightening around the brush. He didn't look wild when Boone stood in front of him, he said quietly. Cyrus scoffed. "That's 'cause he ain't met the wrong kind of day yet. You wait. That horse'll snap, just like they always do." His voice was hard, but his eyes flickered, just for a second, with something else. Fear? Regret? Cash noticed. He said nothing, but his silence was getting heavier each day. He was starting to question more than just Boone's methods. He was starting to question his father's legacy. Back at Boone's ranch, May Delmore pulled her old pickup into the drive. She stepped out with her vet bag slung over one shoulder and a calm steadiness in her step. Boone met her halfway. "Thought I'd check his leg again," she said, nodding toward the corral. "And maybe yours too. You look like you haven't blinked since yesterday." Boone gave a half smile. "I'm not blinking until I know he won't kill me in my sleep." They walked to the fence together. May leaned over the rail, whistled softly. Blaze twitched but didn't back away. She observed his movements carefully, noting the stiffness in his gait and the quiet. "He's not as tense today," she said. "He's still watching you, but he's not waiting for the next hit. That's something." Boone nodded slowly, but his eyes were distant. "He reminds me of someone," he said. "Not just me. Someone else I knew." May didn't ask who. Instead, she glanced at the barn, then back at Boone. "If you're planning to keep him, you'll need more than space and silence," she said. Boone nodded once. "I know." But even as he spoke, something gnawed at him. The scar above Blaze's eye, and the way his ears always turned west at night, like he was listening for someone who wasn't coming back. The wind that evening carried more than dust. It carried memory. Boone stood outside the barn, leaning against a post, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Blaze paced inside the corral, agitated. His head snapped at every gust, nostrils flared, hooves restless. Something about the wind unsettled him, as if it whispered things only he could hear. Boone knew that kind of wind. It used to visit him after June died, low, constant, full of voices that were supposed to be gone. Inside the barn, Boone laid out a worn saddle, not to use, but to let Blaze see it. The horse froze when he noticed. His muscles tensed like piano wire, and his ears flattened. Boone said nothing, just left the saddle in the open and backed away. Blaze stared at it for a long time, then slowly turned his back to it, not in peace, but in avoidance. The message was clear. Not yet. Later that night, Boone sat at the old kitchen table, flipping through a stack of papers he hadn't touched in years. Vet reports, old adoption records, auction documents. He found one with a familiar seal, Bellamy Stock Company. His jaw tightened. The scar. The brand. The fear in Blaze's eyes when a man raised his hand too fast. It wasn't wildness. It was history. And suddenly, Boone realized Blaze wasn't just another horse sold through an auction. He had belonged to Cyrus Bellamy. Back at the Bellamy Ranch, Cyrus poured himself a shot of whiskey with a shaking hand. He stared out at the night, where the moonlit fence line seemed too quiet. Cash entered without knocking. "I want to see the horse," he said. Cyrus didn't answer right away. "You know what he is," he muttered. "You know what he did." Cash leaned on the doorway. "Do I? Or do I only know what you told me?" Cyrus turned, eyes sharp. "He was born wrong. No horse bites like that unless something's broken inside." "Or unless someone broke it into him," Cash replied. The next morning, Boone found the gate to the corral swinging open. The latch wasn't broken. It had been lifted. Tracks led off into the trees. Not galloping, walking. Blaze had left. Boone's chest clenched, a cold sweat rising up his back. He looked around. No broken fence, no scattered tools, just absence. And for the first time since June died, Boone felt something that shook him harder than grief. Panic. Boone didn't remember grabbing his boots or slamming the truck door, but he was already halfway down the trail before the sun had cleared the horizon. The trees swallowed the narrow dirt road, branches scraping the windshield like claws. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his stomach twisted into a knot. Blaze was out there, alone, unprotected, and Boone couldn't shake the sick feeling in his chest that this wasn't just a case of a spooked horse. This felt deliberate. He pulled over near the old dry creek bed where the hoofprints had ended. Getting out, he crouched low, scanning the ground. The prints stopped abruptly near the edge of the tree line. But something else caught his eye, a cigarette butt, still warm, crushed into the dirt. Boone's jaw clenched. No one he knew smoked out here. No rancher. No drifter. This wasn't Blaze escaping. This was someone taking him. Back at the ranch, May Delmore arrived just as Boone returned, covered in dust and silence. "I heard on the radio," she said. "You need help." Boone nodded once. She followed him into the barn, where the empty corral seemed to echo louder than any sound. "He didn't run," Boone said flatly. "He walked, and someone opened the gate for him." May frowned. "Do you think it was Bellamy?" Boone didn't answer. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, over at the Bellamy Ranch, Cash stood near the stable, watching his father saddle a gray mare. "Where you headed?" he asked. Cyrus didn't look up. "Just riding the north line." Cash's eyes narrowed. "Funny, you haven't checked that line in 6 months." Cyrus stopped, turned slowly. "If you're fixing to ask whether I had anything to do with that animal disappearing, you better think real hard about who you're talking to." But the pause in his voice was too long. And his hands, Cash noticed, weren't as steady as they used to be. Later that evening, Boone walked the perimeter of his ranch on foot. The sun was falling fast, casting long shadows that looked like wolves in the tall grass. He paused near the fence line, heart hammering. From a distance, something flickered. Metal, maybe? He stepped closer, crouched low. Stuck in the barbed wire was a piece of Blaze's lead rope, torn clean, not frayed. And next to it, a boot print far too large to be Boone's. He touched the rope gently, then stood in the fading light, eyes fixed on the horizon. The ache in his chest had changed. It wasn't panic anymore. It was resolve. The next morning, Boone showed up at the sheriff's office with dirt on his boots and the torn piece of Blaze's lead rope in his hand. Sheriff Holt Bexley looked up from his desk, already sensing trouble. "You sure about this?" he asked, examining the rope. "It's not proof, Boone. Suspicion doesn't hold in court." Boone's voice was flat, but his eyes burned. "I'm not here to ask for a warrant. I'm telling you this. If something happens to that horse, I'll hold Bellamy responsible. One way or another." Holt leaned back, sighing. He'd known Boone for decades, before June died, before he turned into a ghost with a heartbeat. But today, Boone wasn't hollow. He was on fire. "Just don't do anything stupid," the sheriff muttered. Boone didn't reply. He turned and left, the door swinging shut behind him with a finality that made Holt's gut tighten. Out at the Bellamy Ranch, Cash found his father in the tack room, sharpening an old hoof knife. "You need to tell me the truth," Cash said, voice shaking. "Did you take the horse?" Cyrus didn't even look up. "I didn't take anything," he said. "I reclaimed what never should have left." Cash's face darkened. "You're not God, and that horse ain't yours. You gave him up." Cyrus stood slowly, the knife still in his hand. "You're soft, boy, just like your mother was. That horse was broken, and I made him useful. Boone's too weak to do what needs to be done." Cash stepped back, his fists clenched. For the first time in his life, he didn't just disagree with his father. He was afraid of him. Back at Boone's ranch, May Delmore was waiting on the porch when Boone returned. "You found something else, didn't you?" she asked. Boone handed her the second lead rope, the one found near the north fence, with dried blood on one end. "Blaze didn't just get taken," he said. "He fought." May's eyes filled with something between fear and fury. "If they're hurting him," Boone nodded, "then I won't be asking twice." That night, Boone saddled his old gelding, a quiet horse named Clyde, and rode out under the stars. He didn't tell May where he was going. He didn't need to. She just handed him a flashlight and a rifle she'd kept since her father passed. "Find him," she said. Boone looked at her, then toward the distant hills. "I will." And as he rode into the darkness, the wind picked up again. The same wind that had carried memory now carried something else entirely. Vengeance. The moon cast pale silver light over the ridge as Boone guided Clyde through the narrow trail that cut between two crumbling fence lines. Every hoofbeat echoed through the stillness. His eyes scanned the terrain, alert to every movement. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement near a rusted cattle chute behind an abandoned shed. Boone dismounted quietly, crouching low. In the faint glow of his flashlight, he caught the shape of a horse. Blaze. The stallion stood tied to a fence post, coat dusty, a small wound on his flank crusted with dried blood. He was breathing hard, not from panic, but exhaustion. Boone stepped forward, slow and quiet, whispering his name. Blaze's ears twitched, his head lifting. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by something deeper, relief. Boone reached the rope, his hands steady. "I got you now," he murmured. "You held on." But the moment was broken by a voice in the dark. "Step away from the horse, Boone." Boone turned, flashlight catching the outline of Cyrus Bellamy, rifle resting across his chest. "He ain't yours," Cyrus growled. "He's dangerous. I gave that animal a second chance once, and he wasted it. You're making the same mistake I did." Boone stood tall, placing himself between Blaze and the gun. "You didn't give him a second chance. You tried to crush what was wild in him. That ain't training, that's abuse." Cyrus's grip tightened. "He almost killed me." Boone nodded. "Because you taught him fear instead of trust. You made him what he became." Behind them, another voice broke through the tension. "He's right." Cash stepped into view, hands raised. His eyes were on his father. "I followed you. I needed to see it for myself. You always said you did what needed to be done, but this is just hate wearing a cowboy hat." Cyrus's eyes flickered, rage and shame fighting behind them. For a long second, no one moved. Then Boone stepped forward, slowly untying Blaze's lead. The stallion didn't resist, didn't flinch, just watched. Boone met Cyrus's eyes. "You're not taking him again." Cyrus lowered the rifle, then turned and walked away. As dawn broke over the ridge, Boone led Blaze down the trail. Cash followed a few steps behind, silent, uncertain, but changed. Blaze walked close, his head lowered slightly, not in submission, but in peace. For the first time since June's death, Boone felt something deep begin to shift. Not closure, but healing. The morning after the ridge felt like the world had stopped holding its breath. Boone walked beside Blaze as they reached the pasture gate. He unlatched it slowly, letting the stallion take the first step in. Blaze paused, looked around, then stepped forward into open space. No chains, no ropes, just air and grass. For a moment, Boone wasn't sure what the horse would do. But Blaze didn't run. He lowered his head, took a few tentative steps, and began to graze, like he'd been home the whole time. Boone leaned against the fence, arms crossed. The scars on Blaze's flank were healing. Not just the visible ones, the way the horse moved was different now. Less coiled, less haunted. Boone didn't say much. He never had. But inside, something was shifting. For so long, the ranch had been a place of silence and ghosts. Now, it was starting to feel like a place where things might grow again. Inside the barn, Boone found an old wooden box buried beneath a tarp. Inside was June's old leather halter, worn but still intact. Her handwriting, faint and fading, was burned into the inside strap. Patience isn't silence. It's choosing to stay. Boone ran his thumb across the letters, feeling the weight of every word. She had trained colts softer than rainstorms and meaner than fire, and somehow made both love her. That afternoon, Cash Bellamy rode up the long gravel drive. Boone met him halfway. "Didn't expect to see you again," Boone said. Cash shrugged. "Didn't expect to come back." He looked toward the pasture where Blaze was now lying down under the sun. "I wanted to say thank you for what you did, and I wanted to say I'm sorry for what he did." Boone studied him for a long moment. "You're not your father," he said finally, "but you'll spend some years carrying his shadow. Just make sure it don't become yours." Cash nodded slowly. "I'm trying." He looked down at the saddlebag slung over his shoulder. "There's some papers. Ownership transfer. You don't owe him a cent. It's official now. Blaze is yours." Boone didn't answer right away. He took the papers, folded them carefully, and slipped them into his back pocket. Then he looked out over the pasture. Blaze lifted his head for a moment, eyes calm, then settled again into the grass. The wind had changed. It no longer carried memory. It carried possibility. 3 weeks later, the ranch looked different. Not because the fences were new or the barn was freshly painted, but because the air felt lighter. Boone stood at the edge of the corral, a saddle in his hands. Not June's. Not the auction gear. A new one. Simple, soft, built with care. Blaze stood a few feet away, watching. Boone moved slow, respectful. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Blaze didn't flinch. He stepped forward, steady as the rising sun. The saddle went on without a fight. Boone didn't cinch it tight. Just let Blaze feel it. They walked the length of the corral together. No reins, no rope. Just presence. For Boone, it wasn't about breaking the horse. It never was. It was about rebuilding something, in Blaze and in himself. He could almost hear June's voice in the wind. "That's it, Boone. Don't push. Just be there." By the porch, May Delmore leaned against the railing with a mug of coffee in hand. She smiled as Boone and Blaze moved together in rhythm. "You ever think you'd get here?" she asked as he approached. Boone shook his head. "Didn't think I'd get anywhere after she passed." May nodded, her gaze soft. "Maybe you didn't need to move forward. Maybe you just needed to stand still long enough for something to come back to you." Later that afternoon, Cash returned with a trailer full of fencing supplies. "Figured I'd help fix that back line," he said, unloading without waiting for permission. Boone watched him for a moment, then grabbed a pair of gloves and joined him. They worked in silence, but it was a good silence, the kind that builds instead of breaks. By sundown, the two stood at the top of the hill overlooking the ranch. Blaze grazed below, Clyde resting nearby. Boone looked over at Cash. "You ever think about staying?" Cash shrugged. "I have. Thought about leaving too. But this, it feels more honest than anything I've known." Boone nodded. "Well, I won't offer you a job. But I'll leave the gate unlocked." That night, Boone sat on the porch alone, June's halter hanging beside the door, the stars wide and bright overhead. Blaze stood in the pasture, head low, peaceful. Boone took a deep breath, not because he had to, but because he finally could. Some stories don't end with thunder. Some end with a breath and a beginning. And for Boone Kincaid, that was finally enough.